New Life Community Church are back offering another Cap Money course. This fabulous course has been created by Christians Against Poverty, and it's a simple but effective way for everyone to review their finances. So if you want to learn how to build an organised budget, get better at saving, and set money aside for spending, this is the course for you. It really is so simple. We provide you with the tools to help you get to grip with your finances. I personally did the course a few years ago and we found it to be so useful. We finally started paying off our credit card and we still use the tools today to help us stay on top of our monthly finances. This course is free and we're going to be running it over 3 Thursday evenings starting on the 11th of March at 8 p.m. We will meet online via Zoom so you can sit back and relax in the comfort of your own home. We do need you to register so we can send you the budgeting tools to get you started. There really isn't any reason not to do this course. We hope that we can help people like you take control rather than relying on guesswork, so you can plan for the future and weather the storm. Why not take this opportunity to review your finances and learn how to budget, spend, and save?
If you are watching for the first time, welcome. My name is Paul and I lead the team that oversees New Life Community Church. We are continuing to look at a series of questions that really relate to one question. If God, so what? If there is a supernatural being who claims responsibility for the universe and how it works, if there is a God who claims that you and I are the unique products of his handiwork, if there is more to life than what we currently experience, what does that mean for you and me? Or equally, why should that even bother you or me? Today we are looking at the question, what about free will? Do you and I have the ability to make personal choices that are not externally determined by a divine or higher power? I'm hoping today's message will prove helpful, particularly if you are exploring faith and what the Bible has to say about these types of questions. Equally, I hope it will prove helpful in bringing a bit of clarity for those who are followers of Jesus, especially if this has been a particular area of confusion for you. In summary, I'm hoping to make this clear and not confusing. Let's start with an illustration. Do you remember the Ian Livingstone, Steve Jackson books? I used to love them as a child. They were these fantasy adventure books that were designed to make you the central character and enable choice as part of the story. Once you had read the introduction that set the scene, the opening chapter would conclude with a choice. Do you take the path that leads to the village, or do you take the path that heads into the mountains? Each path would lead you to a different page of the book where the story would differ depending on what path you chose. And that's the key thing really about free will. When you reach the fork in the road, do you really get to choose the path you take, or has the author of the book already made that choice for you? On a side note, my wife and I were chatting about reading those books when we were younger and how you would always keep a thumb in the previous section just in case you made a bad choice, and that way you could always go back to choose the other way. So if that sounds all a little bit mind-boggling, let me read to you a quote from the film Enola Holmes. I watched it recently with the family, and if you haven't seen it, other than a couple of particularly violent moments, it's a really good film. The younger sister of Sherlock and the lead character in the film says, "My life is my own, and the future is up to us." Now, I would like you to consider that for a moment, and then give a quick burst answer to this question. Do you agree with that statement? My life is my own, and the future is up to us. The discussion of free will merits itself upon this tension. Either I am in charge of my life, the direction I take, the path I choose, the choices I make, or my life is part of a much bigger picture, and whoever is responsible for that big picture, whether God or the universe, has already predetermined a path for my life. I am not the one in charge or ultimately in control of the direction of my life. So coming back to the fork in the road, do I take the path that leads to the village, or do I take the path that heads into the mountains? Using that Enola Holmes quote, we could summarize two positions of thinking. One, my life is my own and the future is up to us. In other words, I choose the path. And two, my life is not my own and the future is not up to me. In other words, the path has already been chosen. This is the tension that we are going to explore, and we are going to do so through hearing what the Bible has to say on these matters. Now, I would like to do this by looking at the subject of destiny. As I prepared for this message, I thought it would be more helpful to view free will through the lens of destiny, because I think destiny is probably a word or subject that is more commonly thrown around in conversation than free will. So if we give destiny a nice, clear definition, I think that will help us navigate through the subject of free will. Is there an ultimate landing point for our lives? This is what I mean by destiny, an arrival or destination point where the paths that we have taken, whether we have chosen them or they have been chosen for us, lead us to a place where we conclude, this is where I am meant to be in life. This was what I was always meant to be doing. This is who I am. I was born to be a singer. I was made to play football. And you can definitely do that. You can have a look around at some of the people around you, and you could argue people like Adele was born to sing, and Lionel Messi was made to play football. In the case of Enola Holmes, she finds her place and destination like her brother, as a detective. I think today we can look at the subject of free will by giving our time to three areas regarding destiny. And those are, number one, destiny by choice, meaning I determine my own destination, my future, my path. Secondly, destiny by design. Something bigger than myself determines my destination in life, my future and path. And thirdly, no destiny at all. There is no ultimate landing point for my life. I live for today and not for the future. Now, I think we can eliminate the no destiny at all category when considering the nature of free will. And the reason we can do that is because the very question of free will implies the consideration of destiny. If you are not convinced by an ultimate direction or destination in life, then free will really, that's a non-issue for you. It really doesn't apply. Which leaves us to consider destiny by choice and destiny by design. So let's look at these two areas by discovering what the Bible has to say about them. Like the Ian Livingstone, Steve Jackson adventure books, the two main components are the author, the one who has written the big story, and the character, the one who lives their life out within that story. And it makes sense to me to begin exploring this subject by giving our attention to the author, the one who writes the story. So we will start by looking at that. Destiny by design. Okay, so the first thing we should cover is that the Bible makes it clear that there is a big story, what is known as a meta-narrative. Like when you are watching the film 1917, the meta-narrative is World War I. That's the big picture. The Bible is also quick to identify that the author of the meta-narrative is God. God is the sole author of the big story. And we can find the opening of that big story in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So not only does God create it, but he also fills it with vegetation, food, and living creatures. The absolute peak of that creation is reached when God creates man and woman. He gives them a place, a purpose, provision, and quite significantly, he gives them permission. And we'll get to that in a bit. So God is the author of the big story, and the Bible makes it clear that it is him alone who determines the outcome of that big story. He decides the destination, its direction, where the story is going. The book of Isaiah, chapter 46, verse 10, helpfully summarizes God's position regarding this area. This is what God says: I will accomplish all my purpose. From God's perspective, that is not a positive thinking thing, meaning, I really hope this will happen. It is a literal, absolute statement from the author of creation that is saying, my will be done. I will have my way. It will go in the direction that I have determined. So I guess the next question to ask is, what is then God's purpose in the big story? If God is going to have his way and will accomplish his purpose, what is that purpose? Well, to summarize, God tells us himself in Jeremiah 31:33, and also in quite a few other books in the Bible, I will be their God, and they shall be my people. God's purpose is to dwell with his people and for his creation to dwell with him. So in Destiny by Design, the Bible tells us that there is a big story, that God is the author of that story, and that God's purpose is to have a people unto himself who will dwell with him and he with them, and that finally God will fulfill his purpose. Okay, so we've given some time to the author, the one who's written the big story. Now we will turn our attention to the narrative of the character, the one who lives out their life within that story. So let's look at destiny by choice. If the big story of the film 1917 is World War I, the focus of the story is narrowed to the narrative of two British soldiers and their mission to send a message to the front line. So now we are going to narrow into the significance of our story, you and I, with the question really being at the moment, if we conclude what the Bible says is true, that there is a creator God, the author of the big story, how involved then is the author in our story? If God would accomplish his purpose, what does that mean for the choices that I make in my life? Now, there are multiple questions that could come out of this, but I'm just going to use the Bible as my anchor point to help us understand how our narrative works within God's story. And hopefully that should begin to address any questions or confusion, hopefully. So the first thing you need to know is that you've been given a choice. We are free to work out our narrative within the meta-narrative of God's story. That is one of the crucial points covered in the opening chapters of Genesis. We have already talked about the author God who uniquely creates man and woman, gives them a place of purpose and provision, but we also mentioned he gives them permission. This permission is significant as it relates to man and woman's freedom to choose. This is part of the significance of the tree in the Garden of Eden. God had stated it was out of bounds for Adam and Eve, that they weren't allowed to eat of its fruit or they would die. God had created them, placed them, provided for them, and commissioned them with a wonderfully significant task as the first human beings. He also gave them a boundary, of all the things that God had given them, this was the clearest indicator of Adam and Eve's freedom to choose. To not eat the fruit from that tree was to choose to honor God. To eat of the fruit of that tree was to choose to dishonor God. The way that God creates Adam and Eve, places them in the garden, the way that he provides and commissions them as stewards of the earth, and the way that he gives boundaries, all of these things speak to the author's character. The Bible tells us in 1 John 4:8 that God is love. That if we want to understand what love looks like and behaves like, we look to God because he is love itself. And an example of love's behavior and therefore God's behavior is shown to us in a well-known verse from 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient and kind. God is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. God's purpose is to have a people who are thrilled that he is their God and that they are his people. And because of God's character, because of his love, he knows that this kind of relationship is not one of force, it's one of choice. God's people choose to be with him. They choose him to be their God. And this is reinforced by the way that Jesus himself gathered his disciples. When Jesus was speaking to a couple of fishermen, he said, "Follow me and I will make you fishers of men." It's in Matthew 4:18. To follow Jesus was to make a choice. Jesus didn't command it or demand it or plead with people. He just gave them the option. Follow me or don't follow me. That is the liberty that God has given you. The freedom to choose him or not to choose him. Okay, so where does that all leave us? Let's try and summarize what the Bible says about free will, and here are 5 points to help. Okay, 1, there is an author of the big story, and the Bible lays claim that the author of this story is God alone. The universe, how it came to be, the earth, its resources, its occupants. God is the writer of all of that, and is in charge of how that story began and how it will end. 2, God has a purpose and will fulfill that purpose. There is no leeway for maybe or might fulfill that purpose. God will most certainly accomplish all that he has set out to do. 3, God's desire, his will, his purpose in this story is to dwell with his people, his creation, and for them to dwell with him. 4, because of God's character, because of his love, that relationship is something that cannot be forced, but something that is willingly chosen. In its essence, that is what a relationship is, something that is willingly chosen. 5, God gave his creation, you and I, the freedom to choose. And we can either choose to follow him or choose to reject him. Now, if you've stayed with me so far and you're still watching, firstly, well done. Secondly, here is where it gets interesting. Let's bring it back to our Ian Livingstone, Steve Jackson illustration. Do I get to choose the path, or is the path chosen for me? Do I, as the character, have freedom to choose my direction and destination, or has the author of the story already predetermined my path? And the answer is yes. Yes to both of those questions. Yes to my life is my own and the future is up to us. I get to choose my own path, my direction, my destination in life. And yes, to my life is not my own and the future is not up to me. God determines my path, my direction, and my destination. The Bible doesn't actually seek to draw a line between God's sovereignty and our choice. It doesn't say it has to be one way or the other. In fact, it is not shy in telling us that both statements regarding God's sovereignty and our choice are true. God is the author of the story. And as the author, he's able to jump in and direct the narrative as he sees fit. After all, he is the one who established the beginning and gets to determine the ending. And his mission, in his great love, is to accomplish what he set out to do. But within that framework, God, in his great love, has given the bandwidth for people to either choose him or to reject him. When the fishermen chose to follow Jesus, God is in the narrative. He's in the story. God is literally calling them to himself through his son Jesus. And yet the people still got to choose whether they follow or not. When Saul is on his way to persecute those who called themselves Christians, God smashes into the narrative of Saul. He interrupts it to reveal himself. It is here, in a significant moment of encountering God, that then Saul chooses to follow Jesus. And what we really learn from this is that the author of the story, he's not distanced from the narrative, but he is intimately involved. And that is what it looks like to pursue a relationship. You can't do it from a distance. However, though the author might be intimately involved, despite him pursuing you, you can still choose to walk away or to follow. Okay, so how does that relate closer to my ultimate destination, direction, and purpose in life? Well, firstly, the Bible is clear that you actually never reach your ultimate destination in life without a relationship with God. Now, I know that's not very sugar-coated, but that's the truth of what the Bible teaches. as much as we can marvel about some of the achievements, talents, and accomplishments of individuals, to truly understand and be made complete, knowing direction, purpose, and destination, is to do so in relationship with God. Secondly, that's your choice. God's love for you permits that, and he is willing to wait for you, but not forever. As the author of the big story, God has already predetermined the destination for both those who follow him and those who reject him. That is to be eternally with him, heaven, and to be eternally without him, hell. Sure, I haven't got a date for when that is, only God knows. But there is a time when God will call all that we know in this life to an end. Before, according to the scriptures, he then proceeds to make all things new and invite those who decided to follow Jesus to enjoy all that he has made. So that's the crunch of it. The choice is legit. You can choose your destiny. But it is also true that in your choice, your destination ultimately lands where God has determined. So a couple of practicals for those who are watching. If you are a Christian and part of a church family, a common question that can crop up is, what is my calling? Which what I believe you're asking is, what is my purpose in God? Now, if that's you, let me encourage you with this. Your purpose is to be his people. That's it. Nothing more complicated than that. God is thrilled with you when you are thrilled with him. Your destination is eternity with God. If you are thrilled with God, in this life, you will learn to live out that life in accordance with all the talents and gifts that God has given you, to the glory of his name, to the building up of his church, and to the blessing of all those around you. That is you living in the good of your calling in Christ. Now, to all those who are watching who have not yet chosen to be a follower of Jesus and have that kind of same question, what is my purpose in life? Firstly, I choose to tell you that my purpose, direction, and destination is known and perfectly satisfied in God. My choice to follow Jesus was the best decision I ever made. Secondly, God is involved in your narrative. I believe that. It was only when I chose God that I realized that God had chosen me. We know that throughout Scripture, which is the Bible, and throughout history, men and women have decided to put their trust in the author of the big story. It is also true that in making those decisions, we also discover, as Jesus says in John 15:16, you did not choose me, but I chose you. Hopefully that will prove to be a helpful something to chew over. Next week, we are going to be looking at the question, what about sexuality? And if you've missed out on any of the series so far, you can catch up through our website, newlifecommunitychurch.co.uk. Just look for the section on preachers and you will find it. As for now, God bless. See you soon.
All these pieces broken and scattered, in mercy gathered, mended and whole, empty-handed but not forsaken. I've been set free, I've been set free. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Oh, I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Oh, I can see you now. Oh, I can see the love in your eyes, laying yourself down, raising up the broken to life. our failure, you take our weakness. You set your treasure in jars of clay. So take this heart, Lord, I'll be your vessel, the world to see your life in me. Oh, amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Oh, I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. Oh, I can see you now. Oh, I can see the love in your eyes, laying yourself down, raising up the broken to life. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Oh, I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. Oh, I can see you now. Oh, I can see the love in your eyes, laying yourself down, raising up the broken.